Here's your smart fact of the day.
Do you know who Bud Dribble is? Bud Dribble was the engineer who was working with Steve Jobs in 1981. And he was the first guy who discovered what Steve Jobs' super awesome power was. And it was the reality distortion field that apparently Steve Jobs used to create. Welcome to Smarter With Sid. And in today's episode, what we are actually going to talk about is about this reality distortion field. I think it's a highly not spoken about subject, especially after Steve Jobs' death. So I'm trying to stage a comeback for it. But there's a lot of valuable lessons for it. So let's go. Right. So why am I so interested in the reality distortion field? Well, let me give you a little bit of context. The context is this. There is so much of information on the internet right now that you might call that it's an overload of information. But the fact is that because of this information, we certainly have it at our fingertips. So, we get facts. A lot of those times we just want to believe what we want to believe, though, because those facts are something which we don't really cross-check or verify, because that data can be actually shown in different ways. Now, for example, the world becoming 8 billion plus can be looked upon in two ways. One is, oh my God, we are going to go to 9 billion. And then how is this earth going to manage with so many, people? The resources will be cut down. The same data can be seen by another set of people saying that, okay, you know what, this is going to go down because it's a demographically skewed sort of 8 billion, out of which a lot of people are geriatrics, and the population rate is going down because people aren't producing babies and the rest of it. So data is really interesting. Data and information is really interesting because you can actually create facts that are basically your own, right? They're basically your own. Now, we live in this world. We live in the world wherein there's a glut of information, but surprisingly, very few facts that will be accepted by everybody. There is always an angle for it. So in this sort of world, we are now coming across people who are amazingly good at reality distortion. Now, what is this reality distortion that Steve Jobs was really famous for? What he used to do was he used to question the rules and limitations with which people thought. And see, this was the way in which he was. He was not somebody who was, kind of accepting rules in some ways and then having reality distortion in some other ways. Of course, you have to be a complete lunatic if you don't follow basic norms in life. Like if you start breaking all traffic signals because you don't believe in rules, well, you're going to have an accident. So I'm not saying Steve Jobs was that loony, but he was certainly an interesting character because he believed that a lot of these self-imposed rules and limitations that most human beings have can be challenged. So he was certainly a believer in this specific aspect, not about just his company, but also about himself. So he used to challenge himself because you got to believe what you're selling eventually, isn't it? So this reality distortion field was the way in which he was speaking with his employees or partners or people who are going to be his customers and the rest of it in a manner that would convince them to challenge their own assumptions about, okay, so this product is going to require a year to build. And he say, hey, I want it in 3 months. And I'm sure it can be done in 3 months. And the way in which he was speaking about it, you came out of the room believing that that is the case. Now, is this a good leadership trait or is this a terrible leadership trait? Well, I think that it is essentially what it is. It can be used for good or nefarious purposes. But let's look at how it can be used for good purposes, right? So a reality distortion field, when you are talking to a team that totally believes in you and your charisma and your personality and the fact that you've come to the place that you have with that of past successes, is something that can work like a charm, because a lot of us are expanding work maybe till time and the rest of it, right? And we know those tropes. But the fact is that we are always looking towards a leader who can inspire us, a leader that can charm us into believing that, hey, something magical is within the realms of possibility. Now, Steve Jobs' character and personality was something, that was unique to him, but he could manage this reality distortion really, really well. And he could make people actually accept and succeed in deadlines. And it was just the way in which he looked at problems and he looked at potential solutions. Now, if I have to really go to first principles, because that's what we do on Smarter With Sid, there are 2 or 3 first principles that come in mind which can be very useful for us. The first is, hey, Steve Jobs was essentially somebody who was talking to his own tribe. I don't think you can do this to anybody. So, like, for example, just think of a really popular political leader and look at him trying or her trying to actually talk to people of the other party, right? Supporters of the other party. It's not going to work. So you got to know where you have to peddle your reality distortion is the first point that I'd like to make. The second point that I'd like to make is I think that inherently we are looking for a leader who can show us the path. Now, this is, I think, biologically driven in us or something, because what we are trying to figure out is, as a tribe, how do we move ahead? And it is where you need a leader who is confident enough to say that, hey, this is the path ahead. I know that it looks tough right now, but it's not really tough. You just have to look at things slightly differently, or maybe try a different approach or stuff like that. And we've always gravitated towards such leadership because, face it, across millennia, we've been facing so many challenges as a species, and there's uncertainties, right? And if there are uncertainties, you need to look at somebody who has got a perspective on those uncertainties, making them certain. So that's the second thing. So you are looking at some kind of leadership which is making the uncertain certain. Yes? And this is amazing because this kind of dovetails into my third point, which is, okay, so how does a leader actually achieve this? Now, for that, you need to have a vision that you have complete faith in. Now, Steve Jobs, famously and very weirdly, used to think that the customer does not know what the customer wants. He knows better than the customer because he has a vision for the customer that the customer has not yet seen. So he used to believe in the power of his imagination and the power of his ability to create something for the customer that the customer has not thought of, because the customer is bound by rules and limitations and has accepted her or his lot in life, right? And Steve Jobs knew this intuitively. So he knew that he had a vision, and that vision converted itself into certainty, first in his brain and then into the brains and hearts and minds of people around him, his tribe. And because that vision was communicated with certainty, people start to believe in that sort of vision. Right? So this is a very interesting tale for us, because reality distortion is something that we can practice, okay, with the correct use of language and with the correct use of belief and with the correct use of intuition. But the core aspect is you need to have a vision that can lead people and make people feel positive about things. So as a team leader, as a manager, as a CEO, as somebody who's starting out but wants to make an impression, this is something certainly to consider. But do remember, be very selective about your reality distortion. Otherwise, people will just think you're completely bonkers. Isn't it so? Well, I hope you like this specific episode of Smarter with Sid. I've become a little smarter because of my distorting reality on my own mind, maybe. I don't know. Just a joke, people. Do follow me on LinkedIn or on Instagram. I'm the Traveling Professor. And if you like this podcast, please do like and subscribe to this. Helps us a lot. And hey, if you like podcasts like these, do check out all the other stuff that IVM's got for you. On that happy note then.